In this video, I'm going to show you the 7 different types of chords that exist in music. I'm going to show you how they are constructed and what they are used for. We call this chord theory. Now, it's important to have at least a basic understanding of keys and scales, so I'd recommend watching my videos on these topics before watching this one. We'll start with major chords. These are just triads, made up of the root, the third, and the fifth notes in the scale. Just a few examples here to illustrate my point. We have a C major and a D major. A minor chord is very similar to a major chord, except we diminish the third note. That is to say, we lower the third notes by a semitone. Take, for example, C minor or D minor. Major chords are typically associated with happy or uplifting feelings, whereas minor chords are usually associated with sad or melancholic feelings. Both major and minor chords are the basic building blocks of music. Their function is both structural and harmonic. The final point to make here is that every other chord in this list you'll find is built on the major triad. Augmented chords. These are simply a triad with a raised or augmented fifth. So a C augmented would be C, E, and G sharp. A D augmented would be a D, F sharp, and a B flat. But what do we use augmented chords for? Well, their function is to create tension and instability in music. They are very effective if you use them properly. Diminished chords. A diminished chord is a triad with a lowered or diminished third and fifth note. So a C diminished would be C, E flat, and G flat. And a D diminished would be D, F, and A flat. Diminished chords might be the most interesting chords on this list. They add a sense of drama, tension, and suspense into music. They have a distinct dark and dissonant sound that just feels eerie. They're also unstable, which just means that every time you play it, you feel like you want to resolve it somehow. Suspended chords. A suspended chord is a chord in which the third is omitted and replaced with a second or fourth. Let's look at some examples. A C sus2, which is how you would write it and say it, would be a C, D, and G. A C sus4 would be a C, F, and G. A D sus2 would be a D, E, and A. And a D sus4 would be D, G, and A. So what is the purpose of a suspended chord? Well, music is all about tension and release. At any given moment in a melody, we're either building tension or we are releasing that tension. And we can use a suspended chord to delay the release. So instead of resolving to C major, if the piece was in C, we could move to a C sus4 and then resolve to the C major triad. What about chords that have numbers attached to them? Well, we've already had a taste of this when we discussed suspended chords. The number basically just refers to the notes in the scale we are adding to the chord. So a C6, for example, would be C, E, G, and an A. We just added the 6 notes in the scale into the chord. It should be noted that sometimes a C6, for example, might be written as a C add 6. It's the exact same thing. We're told to play a C major triad and to add a 6th. Another thing to point out is that when you get to your 7ths, well, there's a difference between a 7th and a major 7th. A C7 would be C, E, G, and B flat, whereas a C major would be C, E, G, and B. A major 7 is so named because we're adding the 7th note in the major scale, whereas a straight 7 is actually just adding a diminished 7th. There's also a minor 7th, which would be a C, an E flat, a G, and a B flat. And there's a minor major 7th, also known as a Hitchcock chord. Just play it and you'll hear why it's called that. A C minor major 7th would be C, E flat, G, and B. You also get a dominant 7th, a diminished 7th, a half diminished 7th, an augmented 7th, an augmented major 7th. You know what? I'm just going to put the table on the screen to save us all some time. The purpose of all of these chords kind of depends on which note we're adding to the chord. 7ths, for example, can be used to add either softness or tension to regular minor and major chords. Okay, that's a lot of different chords. Let's move on to something a little simpler, shall we? Slash chords, or to use a more technical term, which I'm pretty sure no one really uses these days, the compound chord. It's a chord in which we add a note below the root notes. In modern music, slash chords often notate what the bass guitarist should be playing. So a very common slash chord on guitar would be D over F sharp. Note that the first letter indicates the triad, and the second letter indicates our bass note. So D over F sharp would be played as D, F sharp, and A, with another F sharp added in an octave lower. A C over E would be C, E, and G, and another E added in an octave lower. Notice, by the way, that most of the time when you use these chords, the bass note is the third note in the triad. There are definitely exceptions to this, but more often than not, this is how a slash chord will tend to go. The purpose of a slash chord is simply to emphasize the third or the fifth note as opposed to the root notes of the chord. They're also very useful for adding more emotion and movement in your music. I use them a lot. And that's it. We've pretty much covered every single type of chord that exists. I really hope this video has been useful to you. Next time we're going to look at putting these chords together in progressions. I'll see you in the next one.